August 22nd, 1940. The dim hum of fluorescent lights flickered over the cramped radio room aboard U-47, a German U-boat slicing through the cold Atlantic swells off the coast of Ireland. Salt air clung to everything, mixing with the acrid tang of overheated vacuum tubes and stale cigarette smoke. The vessel rocked gently, but inside the tension was a living thing, coiling tighter with each tick of the Enigma machine's rotors. Oberfunkmat Hans Lauer slouched in his swivel chair, his uniform rumpled and unbuttoned at the collar. At 24, Hans was no stranger to the grind of submarine life. Endless patrols, the constant dread of depth charges, the rationed meals that left him perpetually hungry. But tonight, exhaustion had won. His shift had stretched into the early hours, and the repetitive chatter from the Enigma keys blurred into white noise. The machine sat before him on the narrow desk, its wooden frame scarred from rough handling, the three rotors gleaming dully under the light. Each letter he typed, methodically encoding the boat's position report, required focus, but Hans's eyes were heavy, his fingers sluggish. He lit another cigarette, the match flaring briefly and casting shadows across the dials. The boat's commander, Günther Prien, had been clear. Transmit the nightly weather cipher promptly. No delays. U-47 was deep in enemy waters, hunting Allied shipping, and every message carried the weight of the Kriegsmarine's secrets. Hans exhaled a plume of smoke, watching it curl toward the ventilation grill. The codebook lay open beside him, its pages dog-eared, listing the daily settings: rotor order I-223, ring settings ABC, plugboard connections meticulously mapped. He began typing the plain text. Wetterbericht für 23. August, Nordwestwind, Stärke 4, See gerauig. Click, clack. The Enigma word, scrambling the words into gibberish for transmission, but as Hans reached the end, a yawn overtook him. His hand hovered over the keys. Normally, he'd close with the standard sign-off, Heil Hitler, but protocol demanded variety to avoid patterns. Instead, in his fatigue, he typed it anyway, the words flowing from muscle memory. Heil Hitler. Simple, rote. He didn't think twice. Why bother changing it? No one would notice. The boat was silent save for the distant thrum of diesels, and his relief, young Fritz, was snoring in the bunk across the compartment. Hans hit transmit. The Morse code pulsed out from the antenna, a series of dots and dashes leaping into the ether, followed by the encrypted weather data. He leaned back, rubbing his eyes, oblivious to the tiny crack he'd just introduced into the unbreakable facade of Enigma. The machine, that marvel of German engineering invented by Arthur Scherbius in the 1920s, was designed to defy decryption. Its polyalphabetic substitution, with over 150 million possible configurations, turned messages into an impenetrable fog. Lazy habits like his were supposed to be impossible. Operators drilled relentlessly to vary phrases, to never repeat plain text in a way that could betray the settings. But Hans wasn't alone in his sloth. Across the fleet, from the bustling ports of Wilhelmshaven to the shadowed pens of Lorient, similar lapses crept in. Men were human, after all, ground down by war's relentless pace. As U-47 submerged to evade a suspected patrol, the signal faded into the night, racing toward the antennas of Britain's Y service stations along the coast. You can almost feel the chill of that transmission, can't you? The invisible thread stretching across the waves, carrying not just weather banalities, but the first unwitting thread in a tapestry that would unravel the Axis's greatest secret. Meanwhile, in the rolling hills of Buckinghamshire, England, the spires of Bletchley Park pierced the misty dawn. It was the same date, August 22nd, but worlds away from the steel confines of the U-boat. The mansion, a sprawling Victorian relic requisitioned by the Government Code and Cipher School, buzzed with the quiet urgency of secrecy. Hut 8, a squat wooden barrack amid the gardens, housed the team tasked with cracking naval Enigma, codenamed Shark by the British. Gordon Welchman, the hut's chief, paced the narrow aisles between desks cluttered with IBM punch-card sorters and endless reams of perforated paper tape. At 38, Welchman was a mathematician turned codebreaker, his sharp features etched with the strain of months of failure. The air smelled of ink, tea, and the faint ozone from prototype electromechanical devices. "Another intercept," he muttered, as a WAF messenger, Women's Auxiliary Air Force, delivered a fresh stack of raw Morse transcripts, hot from the radio direction finders at Scarborough. Among the pile was the U-47's message, its dots and dashes now transcribed into neat columns of ciphertext. Alan Turing, the brilliant but eccentric mathematician, hunched over his desk in the corner, his hair disheveled, a half-eaten apple forgotten beside him. Turing's bomb machines, those hulking rotor-driven beasts inspired by Polish cryptologists, were still in prototype, whirring futilely against the naval keys. "Patterns," Turing said softly, more to himself than anyone. "We need a crib, something predictable." The team pored over the intercepts. Most were impenetrable, but this one ended curiously. The final groups repeated a sequence that, when cross-referenced with known German phrases, hinted at Heil Hitler. It was a long shot, but in the cryptanalytic trenches, long shots were all they had. Welchman circled the letters on the page, Heilhitler. If true, it was a repetition, a deadly sin in Enigma protocol. Operators were forbidden from ending messages with salutes in plain text, as it could provide a crib for attackers. As the sun climbed, casting golden light through the hut's blackout curtains, the team fed the crib into their manual grids. Ringstellung approximations narrowed, plugboard trails emerged. Hours blurred into a frenzy of pencil scratches and heated debates. "It's too consistent," Joan Clark, the young Wren linguist, noted, her voice steady amid the chaos. "This operator didn't vary. He's handed us the key on a platter." By midday, a partial break. The day's rotor wiring glimpsed through the fog. It wasn't the full codebook, but it was a chink in the armor. Turing's eyes lit up behind his round glasses. "One lazy soul in the Atlantic," he murmured, "and we've got our foothold." Outside, the estate's peacocks screeched, indifferent to the revolution unfolding. Bletchley Park, with its 10,000 souls sworn to silence under the Official Secrets Act, was a hive of intellects, mathematicians, linguists, chess champions, united against the machine. But this breakthrough traced back to a single U-boat radio room, to Hans Lauer's yawn and unthinking keystrokes. As evening fell, the decrypted weather report confirmed the crib. Wind strength 4, sea calm, mundane details that masked the larger storm. U-47 pressed on, its crew unaware that their words had pierced the veil. Hans, bunked down at last, dreamed fitfully of home, the Enigma's curse lingering like smoke in the air. The war machine ground on, but in that moment the tide began to turn, not with battleships or bombers, but with the quiet click of a cipher wheel yielding to human folly. September 15th, 1941. The salt-sprayed deck of HMS Audacity bucked against the heaving North Atlantic, grey waves crashing like thunder under a sky bruised with storm clouds. You can taste the brine on your lips, feel the chill wind whipping through your oilskins as the escort carrier steamed at flank speed, her flight deck alive with the frantic scramble of fairy swordfish biplanes being prepped for launch. The air thrummed with the roar of Merlin engines warming up, propellers slicing the mist, while spotters scanned the horizon for the wolfpack shadows that had been hounding convoy HG-73 for days. Captain Edward Preston gripped the bridge rail, his binoculars pressed to his eyes, scanning the convoy's ragged formation. 22 merchant ships laden with vital supplies from Gibraltar, ringed by a thin screen of destroyers and corvettes. At 42, Preston was a veteran of Jutland's echoes, his face weathered like the ship's hull, but tonight his jaw was set tighter than usual. Intelligence from Bletchley had come in just hours ago, decrypted Enigma traffic warning of U-boat concentrations ahead. Shark keys, they called the naval ciphers, and for the first time, the codebreakers were ahead of the game, thanks to that initial crib from U-47's sloppy operator a year prior. Down in the radio shack, buried amid the tangle of wires and humming receivers, leading telegraphist Sarah Wilkins hunched over her Morse key, her fingers dancing across the pads. The 20-year-old from Liverpool had joined the WRN's, Women's Royal Naval Service, seeking escape from the Blitz's rubble, but submarine hunts had forged her into something sharper. The cabin reeked of hot solder and instant coffee, the bulkheads vibrating with the carrier's pulse. Intercepts flooded in, faint beeps from German boats coordinating attacks, their signals triangulated by the Y stations back home. "Got another one?" Sarah murmured to her mate, Petty Officer Tom Hargrove, as a fresh burst crackled through the headphones. It was U-567, Kapitan Lieutenant Engelbert Endras commanding, barking orders in clipped code. But the Enigma veil was thinning. Bletchley's bomb machines, now numbering a dozen in Hut 8, had evolved from Turing's prototypes, relays clicking like mechanical hearts, sifting millions of configurations per hour. That Heil Hitler repetition had been the spark. Analysts had reverse-engineered rotor paths, building a chain of cribs from predictable phrases in weather reports and routine traffic. Lazy operators across the fleet, tired men repeating sign-offs, using short good hunting messages without variation, were unwittingly feeding the beast. On the bridge, Preston's radio officer burst in, clutching a flimsy, "Ultra priority, sir. U-201 and U-567 repositioning to the southwest bearing 240. Estimated contact in 2 hours." Ultra, the codename for Bletchley's decrypted gold, was reshaping the war at sea. No longer blind, the Allies could route convoys around the packs, ambush the hunters. Audacity's swordfish, those ungainly string bags, were being vectored now, their torpedoes armed for a preemptive strike. You imagine the pilots in their cockpits, hearts pounding as the deck elevators hoisted the planes skyward. Lieutenant Commander Marvin Moffat, leading the strike, adjusted his helmet, the wind howling through the open canopy. His swordfish, marked with the carrier's white stripes, taxied into position, the observer in the rear turret scanning for periscopes. "This one's for real," Moffat shouted over the engine's snarl. "Bletchley's got their number." Far below, in the depths, U-567 sliced through the black water at periscope depth. Obersteuermann Karl Becker manned the hydrophones, his ears strained against the hiss of propellers. The boat, a Type 7C workhorse, carried 20 torpedoes in her tubes, her crew of 44 hardened by months at sea. Commander Endras, a protégé of Prien's, paced the control room, his iron cross glinting under the red-shaded lamps. "Surface in 10, he ordered, voice steady. The conning tower hatch would soon breach the waves, allowing the radio operator to transmit a contact report. Another Enigma burst, hopefully clean this time. But cleanliness was a luxury fatigue eroded. In the WOP, wireless operator compartment, Fähnrich zur See Otto Müller just 20, wiped sweat from his brow. The air was thick, oxygen scrubbers wheezing, the boat's batteries humming faintly. His Enigma sat bolted to the bulkhead, rotors set per the latest key sheet smuggled from HQ. For 6C, Y order, rings at 12:05:19, plugs linking AM, BF, and so on. Müller typed the report, Sichtung leichter Verband, Position 15N, 15W, angreifen. Sight light formation, position confirmed, attacking. He paused, fingers itching for the cigarette forbidden during transmission. Protocol screamed for a varied close, perhaps end or a numeric pad. but exhaustion from the endless dive won. "Heil Hitler!" he added, the keys clacking decisively. "Why risk a glitch?" The boat was evading destroyers. No one would care about a sign-off. The Morse key tapped out the encrypted stream, antenna trailing astern like a lifeline to Berlin. Back on Audacity, Sarah's receiver lit up. "There it is," she said, transcribing furiously. The message beamed across the waves, intercepted by direction finders at Chicksands and Ventnor. Within minutes, it reached Bletchley via secure teleprinter, slotted into Hut 8's workflow. In the Buckinghamshire twilight, the park's huts glowed like fireflies against the blackout. Gordon Welchman, now with shadows deepening under his eyes from relentless shifts, reviewed the fresh intercept with his team. Alan Turing was away testing a new bomber variant at Dollis Hill, but Joan Clark stood at the blackboard, chalk in hand. "Another one," she said, her voice laced with grim satisfaction. "Same repetition at the end. These fools never learn." The crib slotted in seamlessly, the Heil Hitler plain text aligned against the ciphertext, revealing plugboard steckers and ring settings. Tommy Flowers, the eccentric post office engineer, tinkered nearby with his Colossus prototype, valve-driven, not rotor-based yet, but a glimpse of electronic futures. One lazy keystroke cascades, Welchman noted, as the settings cracked open like a safe. The full message decrypted, U-567 spotting the convoy, intent on attack. By 2200 hours, the orders flew back. Audacity's swordfish launched into the night, guided by the Ultrafix. Moffat's formation droned low over the swells, radarless but armed with Bletchley's eyes. Spotting the feather of a periscope wake, they dove, torpedoes streaking into the foam. Aboard U-567, alarms wailed as the first depth charges from an escort rattled the hull. Endras bellowed orders, "Hart rechts, Tiefe 150!" But the trap had sprung. The swordfish strikes crippled her sister boat nearby, and U-567 limped, her transmission the noose around her neck. Preston watched from the bridge as flares lit the sea like a battlefield. Explosions blooming orange. 2 U-boats down, the convoy saved, for now. In the radio shack, Sarah leaned back, exhaling. "Bletchley's magic," she whispered. But it wasn't magic, it was human error, amplified by genius. At Bletchley, Clark erased the board, the decrypted sheets filed for Admiral Donitz's unwitting rivals. The chain grew. Each sloppy operator's habit built the crib library, from weather banalities to tactical pings. Hans Lauer's yawn from a year ago echoed in every break, a single thread pulling the Enigma apart. As Audacity pressed on, the Atlantic's fury matched the wars, but for the first time, the hunters became the hunted. The code's facade cracked wider, and with it, the Reich's grip on the seas began to slip. One lazy operator at a time. February 18th, 1942. The cramped conning tower of U-158 cut through the ink-black Labrador Sea, ice floes scraping against the hull like ghostly fingers in the frigid night. You can hear the groan of steel protesting the cold, feel the bite of sub-zero winds whipping across the bridge as Watch Officer Lieutenant zur See, Wilhelm Voss, scanned the horizon through his binoculars, breath fogging the lenses. The Type 9C U-boat, a long-range predator dispatched from Lorient under Operation Drumbeat, had been prowling the American coast for weeks, her crew frayed by the endless grey monotony and the gnawing fear of Yankee hunter-killers now flooding the waters post-Pearl Harbor. Below decks, in the stifling radio room, Matros Funkgast Eric Brandt hunched over the Enigma machine. The compartment's air thick with the stench of unwashed bodies, diesel fumes, and the metallic tang of overheated electronics. At 22, Eric was a farm boy from Bavaria, conscripted into the signals branch after basic training in Kiel. His hands, calloused from cranking the boat's generator during blackouts, trembled slightly as he adjusted the rotor rings under the dim red glow of the battle lantern. The daily key settings, fresh from the codebook updated via torpedo tube delivery, were etched in his mind. Rotors 245, Ringstellung 07, 14 to 21, plugboard pairings including QE, TZ, and a dozen more that twisted plaintext into an unbreakable labyrinth. Or so the propaganda posters claimed. U-158 was closing on convoy on 67, a vital lifeline of 36 ships steaming from Halifax to Liverpool, their holds stuffed with tanks, aircraft and food to fuel Britain's defiance. Kapitan Lieutenant Erwin Rostin, the boat's commander, had ordered a contact report. Position, enemy strength intent to shadow until the pack could assemble. Eric's fingers danced across the keys, encoding the message with practiced rhythm. Convoy Sichtung, 36 Schiff escorts, 8, position 53N 45W, Folgen. Convoy sighted, 36 ships, escorts 8, position confirmed, following. The Enigma whirred softly, lamps flickering as each letter transformed, E into X, A into K, the polyalphabetic dance ensuring no pattern endured. But as Eric reached the end, fatigue clawed at him. The patrol had stretched 28 days. Sleep came in snatches amid the boat's ceaseless dive alarms. Protocol, drilled into him during endless lectures at the Flensburg school, demanded variation. No repeated phrases, no predictable closings that could gift attackers a crib. Yet, in the haze of exhaustion, his mind wandered to the rote salutes from home-front letters. Heil Hitler, he typed, the keys clicking with finality. It was harmless, he thought, a morale booster for the fatherland, not a slip. No one checked sign-offs amid the Wolfpack's frenzy. He tapped out the Morse, the signal pulsing from the trailing wire antenna, dots and dashes slicing through the static, bound for the BDU headquarters in Paris. Aboard the destroyer, HMS Walker, slicing the swells at the convoy's van, the night air on the bridge carried the sharp scent of cordite from earlier gunnery drills, and the oily reek of fuel from the oiler in tow. Commander David Pathick, at 35 a survivor of the Norway fiasco, gripped the voice tube, his voice cutting through the gale. Radar contact bearing 220, range 15 miles. Sounds like tin cans, but could be wolves. The convoy's escort group, bolstered by American four-stackers fresh to the fight, formed a ragged screen against the U-boat menace that had sunk over 400 Allied ships since '39. In the Walker's wireless office, crammed with Type-X machines and humming receivers, telegraphist first-class Reginald Reggie Thompson adjusted his headphones, the compartment vibrating with the destroyer's screws churning at 20 knots. Reg, a wiry Londoner with ink-stained fingers from transcribing intercepts, had seen the Y-service traffic explode since the US entry. Stations from Newfoundland to Iceland feeding raw signals to Bletchley via secure landlines. The air hummed with the chatter of teletype bells, coffee mugs steaming amid stacks of perforated tape. A fresh burst crackled in, U-158's report. Its frequency hopped but triangulated by RAF direction finders at Gander. Reggie's pencil flew across the pad, capturing the ciphertext groups, FJZKP LWRMJ, ending in that telltale repetition. Bloody Huns again, he muttered to his oppo, able seaman Lila Grant, one of the few women cleared for sea duty in signals. Lila, 24 and sharp as a tack, cross-checked the log. Same ending sequence as last week's from U-515. They're getting sloppy. The message rocketed south, encrypted in Allied one-time pads, to the stone corridors of Bletchley Park, where winter frost rimed the windows of Hut 8. It was mid-morning there, the estate shrouded in fog rolling off the lake, peacocks huddled against the chill. Gordon Welchman, his suit rumpled from an all-nighter, gathered his team around the long plotting table, maps of the Atlantic pinned with coloured pins, marking known U-boat positions. The air smelled of chalk dust and strong tea, the hut's wood stoves crackling faintly. Joan Clark, now a senior assistant with a knack for the naval quirks, slotted the intercept into the crib rack. Alan Turing, back from a stint refining the bomb bay at the National Physical Laboratory, peered over her shoulder, his bow tie askew. The machines, 20 now, their drums whirring like synchronized clocks, had matured, incorporating Polish Zygalski sheets and Turing's own diagonal boards to chase Stecker pairings. But the real edge came from the operator frailties, that persistent Heil Hitler tale, a ghost from Hans Lauer's yawn and echoed in a dozen breaks since. "It's the gift that keeps giving," Turing quipped dryly, his voice soft amid the relay clicks. Predictable patriotism in ciphertext. Ironic, isn't it? Clark aligned the crib, the 10-letter plaintext against the ending groups. Menus of possibilities cascaded, false trails pinched off as the ring settings locked in. 07 to 1421, rotors 2-4 plugboards unraveled, Q to E, T to Z. Within an hour, the full decrypt emerged, typed on the hut's underwood. Convoy sighted, 36 ships, escorts 8, position 53N45W, following. Rostein's boat, Welchman confirmed, tracing the grid. "He's calling the pack, U-587, U-701, maybe more." The intelligence cascaded outward. Admiralty's trade plotting room in London vectored the convoy northwest, away from the trap. On 67's Commodore, aboard the SS Xyang Fara, received the flash. Reroute 310 degrees, increase speed to 10 knots. Pathicon Walker got the ultra-whisper via TBS radio. "Submarine contact imminent, bearing 220. Engage at will." You sense the urgency building. The destroyer's guns swiveling as ASDIC pings echoed in the ops room, sharp blips revealing U-158's shadow. Rostein, in his boat's control room, felt the first tremor of unease as hydrophones picked up the escort's screws. "Alarm torsion!" he snapped, the boat diving hard, ballast tanks flooding with a roar. Eric Brandt secured the Enigma, stowing the codebook in its watertight safe, oblivious to how his lazy flourish had betrayed them. The signal, meant to summon allies, had instead lit the path for hunters. HMS Walker charged, her Hedgehog mortar thumping forward charges into the sea, 24 spigot bombs arcing like deadly fireworks. Explosions bubbled up, shaking U-158's frame. Lights flickered, a pipe burst, scalding steam hissing. Rostein ordered evasive spirals, but the escorts, Walker broke and the U.S. Kearney, pinned her. Depth charges from Kearney's K-guns hammered down, one shearing the rudder. On Walker's bridge, Pathick watched the oil slick bloom, debris floating, a life jacket, shattered wood. "She's done," he said, voice grim as the sea swallowed the boat. 42 Germans lost, including Erich, his final keystroke a fatal echo. Back at Bletchley, Clark filed the decrypt, the crib library swelling with variants, now including Sieg Heil slips from weatherboats. Welchman briefed the brass. One operator's habit cascades into dozens, drumbeats faltering, as On 67 steamed safely on, losing only a straggler to a latecomer U-boat. The Atlantic tilted further. Bletchley's edge sharpened, turning the Wolfpack's howls into whispers, thanks to the mundane sins of tired men like Erich, whose laziness wove the thread pulling Enigma's shroud aside. The war's code war intensified, each break a quiet victory in the shadows. July 10th, 1942. The sweltering heat of the Bay of Biscay pressed down on U-701 like a sodden blanket, the Mediterranean blue waters churning white under the sub's screws as she surfaced briefly for battery charge off the Spanish coast. You can smell the sharp ozone of the electric motors winding down, taste the salt crusting your lips from the spray, and hear the distant rumble of Luftwaffe patrols overhead, Junkers 88s escorting the Wolfpack homeward from their grim harvests. The Type 6C boat, scarred from a close shave with RAF Catalinas, limped toward Lorient's pens, her crew gaunt and hollow-eyed after 60 days at sea. tallying 12 ships sunk, but paying dearly in nerves and fuel. In the forward torpedo room, repurposed as an auxiliary radio space during the return leg, Gefreiter der Nachrichtenabteilung Klaus Weber wiped sweat from his forehead with a grimy sleeve. The air stagnant and laced with the reek of cordite residue and fermenting sauerkraut rations. At 25, Klaus was a Berliner by birth, drafted from a typewriter factory into the Signals Corps, his fingers more accustomed to civilian keys than the Enigma's unforgiving brass. The machine perched on a makeshift crate amid stacked warheads, its lamps casting erratic shadows in the humid gloom. Daily settings from the latest Wetterkurzschlüssel, short weather key, were pinned nearby. Rotors 3 Viowa, rings 180311, plugboard a labyrinth of 20 connections like J-O-K-P, twisting letters into shadows. U-701's commander, Kapitän Lieutenant Horst Degen, had ordered a routine situation report before docking: weather, fuel state, damage assessment. The boat was shadowing a lone tanker straggler from convoy SL-115, but fatigue had eroded precision. Klaus's shift overlapped with the engine room's clamour, the diesels coughing black smoke through the snorkel. He typed the plain text deliberately. Wetter klar, Treibstoff 30%, leichter Schaden am Ruder. Zielkonvoi SL-115, Ende. Weather clear, fuel 30%, minor rudder damage. Target convoy SL-115, end. The Enigma hummed, rotors stepping with mechanical precision, outputting ciphertext that danced across the indicator lamps. Quirt Zuyop. But at the close, Klaus's mind drifted to the propaganda broadcasts crackling from the wardroom speaker, endless calls to loyalty amid the Führer's triumphs. Protocol forbade it, of course. The Flensburg instructors had hammered home the risks of repetitive phrases, especially after whispers of British magic sinking boats with uncanny timing. Yet, with Lorient's beer halls beckoning and his bunk calling, Klaus appended the rote salute. Heil Hitler! The keys clacked without protest, a small defiance against the grind. He encoded it seamlessly, then switched to the Morse key, tapping the full burst into the ether, dots and dashes arcing from the collapsible antenna, frequency hopping to evade jammers, destined for the BDU's listening posts in Brest. Aboard HMS Paladin, a sleek, Hunt-class destroyer escorting the battered remnants of SL-115 through the Biscay haze, the afternoon sun glinted off her fore. 7-inch guns as she zigzagged at 15 knots, wake foaming like milk in tea. The convoy, once 28 ships strong from Sierra Leone, now down to 19 after U-boat ambushes, clung together under a screen of 4 escorts, their hulls streaked with camouflage paint. Lieutenant Commander Ian McGregor, 31 and fresh from Malta runs, stood on the open bridge, wind tugging at his duffel coat, the air sharp with the tang of wet wool and gun oil. Binoculars swept the sea for periscopes. ASDIC operators below pinged the depths relentlessly. In the WT office, a steel box amidships humming with the ship's generators, Petty Officer Wireless Telegraphist Elsie Cartwright adjusted the B-28 receiver, her headset clamped tight against the vibration. At 23, Elsie had volunteered for the WRNs after her Coventry home was bombed, her steady hands now decoding the invisible war. The compartment reeked of valve heaters and boiled cabbage from the galley, perforated tape spilling from the Creed teleprinter like ticker tape at a parade. Intercepts poured in from the Y stations at St. Ival and Steeple Morden, raw Morse from U-boats chattering like sparrows before a storm. A signal broke through the static, U-701's report, its DF bearings converging on Biscay's approaches. Elsie's pencil scratched across the log, groups ending in that familiar cluster. Another one with the salute, she said to her assistant, leading Wren Nora Bates, who nodded grimly. Cross-referencing the pattern book. They're like clockwork. Bletchley's going to love this. The message, encrypted in Allied secure channels, sped via HFDF links to the Admiralty's OIC, Naval Intelligence Division, then onward to Buckinghamshire. At Bletchley Park, the summer heat seeped through the hut's vents, turning Hut 8 into a sweatbox despite fans whirring overhead. It was late afternoon, sunlight slanting through half-drawn blinds onto desks piled with codebooks and tea-stained graphs. Gordon Welchman, his shirt sleeves rolled up, conferred with the watch officer as the intercept arrived on the pneumatic tube system, a whoosh and clatter from the mansion's central dispatch. The air carried the faint scent of mimeograph ink and the earthy aroma of the surrounding woods. Where jeeps ferried boffins between blocks, Joan Clark, her hair pinned back against the humidity, pinned the ciphertext strip to the sorting board. Her team, Max Newman, a quiet Manchester mathematician, and a cadre of wrens, gathered round. Alan Turing, on loan from his ace computer designs at the NPL, fiddled with a bomb's control panel nearby. The machine's 36 rotors mimicking Enigma's innards with relentless clicks. Dozens of bombs now dotted the outstations, Gayhurst Manor, Eastcote, churning through cribs at 100 stops per minute. The Heil Hitler ghost, born from Hans Lauer's lapse 2 years back, had spawned a crib menagerie. Weather reports with invariant phrases, short signal repeats like QS queries, even officer roll calls betraying names. "Align it here," Clark directed, sliding the 10-letter crib against the tail. The bomb roared to life, relays chattering like machine gun fire, false pins dropping away as the menu resolved, rotors 3 VY, rings 180311. Plugboards lit up, J to O, K to P, the full decrypt spilling from the printer. Weather clear. Fuel 30%. Minor rudder damage. Target convoy SL-115, end Heil Hitler. Dagon's boat, Newman confirmed, plotting the position on the Atlantic chart. He's low on fuel, easy pickings if we reroute. Welchman dashed off the flimsy to the Admiralty, ultrafix on U-701, position 46N08W, shadowing SL-115. Within the hour, orders cascaded. Paladin's group veered south, Commodore on the MV Clan Ferguson, flashing Aldis lamp signals to tighten the formation. McGregor on the bridge received the TBS Whisper, submarine reported bearing 150, range 20 miles. Investigate. You feel the deck tilt as Paladin surged forward, screws thrashing the sea to foam. Her Type 271 radar sweeping blind spots. ASDIC domes pulsed, echoes sharpening on a contact. U-701 surfacing incautiously for air. Dagon, in his control room, cursed the diesel's betrayal as hydrophones blared the destroyer's approach. "Taucher! Not Licht!" he roared, the boat plunging, claxons wailing. Klaus Weber lashed the Enigma secure, heart pounding, unaware his sign-off had summoned doom. The antenna snapped taut, but it was too late. The signal's echo had betrayed them. Paladin's forward turret barked. 4 7-inch shells straddling the swirl of U-701's dive. Depth charges rolled from the throwers, thumping into the depths like thunderclaps, one cracking the pressure hull. Dagon fought for control, evading spirals, but the escort's hedgehog salvo peppered the sea. Explosions crumpling the boat's frame, lights shattering, water flooding compartments. On Paladin's bridge, McGregor watched the oil and air bubbles rise, a battered Enigma manual bobbing to the surface amid debris. "Confirmed kill," he logged, the convoy slipping away unscathed. SL-115 docked in Liverpool days later, its cargo bolstering the 8th Army's push. Back at Bletchley, Clark updated the crib file, the chain lengthening, now with Biscay variants, operator habits from drumbeat to the Mediterranean. Welchman briefed Churchill's envoys in the mansion's wood-panelled rooms. One man's laziness echoes across the fleet, Enigma's cracking under its own weight. As U-701's wreckage settled into the silt, the Biscay's waves heeled over, but the Code War tilted inexorably. Bletchley's foresight, forged from overlooked keystrokes, turned the tide one decrypt at a time, the Reich's secrets bleeding into Allied hands like ink on wet paper. March 17th, 1943. The relentless gale of the North Atlantic tore at the decks of U-384, a Type 6E U-boat bucking through towering green seas some 600 miles west of the Hebrides, her hull groaning under the assault of wind-whipped spray that stung like needles. You can feel the deck heave beneath your feet, taste the bitter salt on your tongue, and hear the thunderous crash of waves against the conning tower as the boat rode the storm's fury, her crew lashed to their stations in oilskins slick with foam. The Wolfpack, Operation Burmark, had been assembled by Admiral Donitz's urgent signals from Lorient. Over a dozen boats converging on the vital eastbound convoys, their Enigma chatter, a symphony of coordinates and attack plans, meant to choke Britain's lifeline once more. Deep in the bowels, amid the claustrophobic radio compartment, where the air hung heavy with the reek of sweat-soaked wool, battery acid, and the faint, acrid bite of ozone from the sparking equipment, Oberfunkmat Dieter Schmidt hunched over his Enigma machine. At 26, Dieter was a veteran of the Barents sea runs, his face gaunt from months of iron rations and the gnawing anxiety of RAF shadowing. The boat's batteries were fading after days submerged evading aircraft, forcing this perilous surface dash for a quick transmission. The Enigma, bolted to the dripping bulkhead, sat like a squat oracle under the swaying red lamp, rotors set to the month's naval key, VI2 order, ring settings 220905, plugboard a web of letters like FS, GH, designed to confound any eavesdropper with its 159 quintillion permutations. Kapitän-Leutnant Hans-Georg Fischer, U-384's commander, had barked the order from the bridge. Report contact on convoy SC-122, a slow-moving juggernaut of 60 ships lumbering from New York with tanks, fuel, and munitions for the impending Sicilian invasion. The pack was closing in, U-384 tasked with the shadow role, relaying positions to summon the killers. Dieter's fingers, numb from the cold seeping through the hull, pecked at the keys. Convoy SC-122, Sichtung 60 Schiffe, escorts 12, position 58N-20W. Wolfpack angreifen, Treibstoff 40%. Convoy SC-122 sighted 60 ships, escorts 12, position confirmed, Wolfpack attack, fuel 40%. The machine clicked methodically, lamps flashing as plain text morphed into ciphertext chaos. VGLMP quote. But as the message concluded, the storm's roar outside mirrored the exhaustion within. Dieter's shift had blurred into 18 hours. Sleep was a luxury stolen in catnaps amid false alarms. The Flensburg drills echoed faintly, vary everything, no repeats, especially not the Führer's salute that instructors warned could betray the daily menu. Yet, with the diesels gulping air and home leave a distant dream, Dieter's rote habits surfaced. "Heil Hitler," he typed, the keys yielding without resistance, a fleeting nod to morale in the abyss. He didn't pause to encode an alternative. The Morse key waited, insistent. The signal burst forth in staccato pulses, antenna whipping in the gale, leaping toward the BDU's receivers, while Y stations in Britain clawed it from the ether. 600 miles southeast, aboard the destroyer HMS Harvester, flagship of Escort Group B5, slicing through the murk at the convoy's starboard wing, the storm lashed the bridge like a cat-o'-nine-tails, rain sheeting horizontally across the spray hood. Commander Geoffrey Walker, 37 and battle-hardened from the Arctic runs, braced against the rail, his greatcoat sodden, the wind howling through the voice pipes. The convoy, SC-122's behemoths plodding at 7 knots, Liberty ships and tankers wallowing in the troughs, stretched like a steel serpent under blackout, their cargoes the artery feeding Montgomery's desert warriors and the bomber offensive. But ultra, had shifted the odds. Bletchley's decrypts, flowing like a secret river since that first U-47 crib 3 years ago, it painted the Wolfpack's moves in stark relief. In Harvester's WT office, a steel vault throbbing with the destroyer's engines, leading telegraphist Margaret Hale adjusted her headphones against the din, the compartment's air thick with the fug of wet uniforms, hot cocoa, and the electric hum of valves. At 24, Margaret had risen through the WRNS ranks after losing her Bristol family to a V1 prototype scare, her Morse ear now a weapon sharper than any gun. The receiver crackled amid the static storm. U-384's burst, direction found by stations at Wick and Flowerdown, its bearings triangulating the sender. Margaret transcribed the groups with swift precision, ending in the persistent tail. "Gotcha," she murmured to her watchmate, Sub-Lieutenant Eric Poole, who logged it with a nod. Same old song, Bletchley's feast. The intercept raced via secure cipher to the Citadel in London, then to Bletchley, arriving as dawn greyed the estate's lawns. Hut 8 expanded into a warren of partitions amid the Peacock's indifferent strut, pulsed with activity despite the hour. The air carried the sharp tang of fresh perk tea and the oily scent of relay switches, fans whirring to combat the spring chill. Gordon Welchman, his hair greyer from the tonnage wars strain, reviewed the flimsy with his depleted team, many poached for the Manhattan Project. Joan Clark, promoted to deputy head, tacked the strip to the cribboard, her chalk outlining the suspect end. Alan Turing, sequestered more often at Hanslope Park, refining his theoretical machines, had sent a proxy, young I.J. Good, the Oxford logician, who adjusted his spectacles amid the bomb's symphony. Over 40 bombs now hammered away in satellite sites, their drums propelled by American-loaned valves, sifting cribs at blistering speeds. The Heil Hitler motif, that insidious thread from Hans Lauer's Yawn, had evolved into a cryptanalytic arsenal, cross-referenced with weather shorts, tactical repeats like nil-nil contacts, and even officer salutes in personnel traffic. Lazy operators, ground down by losses, now over 100 boats sunk since 42, fed it unwittingly, their habits a statistical sieve. "Run the menu," Clark instructed, feeding the 10-letter crib into the pinboard. The bomby engaged with a mechanical growl, rotors stepping in unison, false trails evaporating as the alignment locked. Rotors VY2, rings 220905, plugboards cascaded, F to S, G to H. The decrypt unspooling, convoy SC-122 sighted, 60 ships, escorts 12, position 58N-20W, Wolfpack attack, fuel 40%, Heil Hitler. Fisher's signal. Good noted, plotting the grid against the latest fixes from U-1665 and U-4444. Burmark's heart, reroute the convoy north, and we got them. Welchman fired the Ultra to the OIC, Wolfpack coordinates, U-384 pinpointed. Orders flashed to Harvester via TBS, Walker's group. Harvester, Hesperus, and the Free French Aconit wheeling into the gale. You sense the urgency cresting, the destroyer's bows plunging into grey walls of water, Aztec pings cutting through the roar like sonar lances. Convoy Commodore on the SS Clan McWhirter adjusted course to 010 degrees, the formation coiling tighter as escorts fanned out. Aboard U-384, Fisher scanned the horizon from the bridge, spray blinding him, hydrophones below picking up the escort's distant screws. "Funkraum, alles klar," he shouted down the tube. Dieter secured the Enigma, wiping his hands, the storm masking his unease, but the signal's echo had drawn blood. Harvester charged through the murk, her squid mortars, new ahead-throwing depth weapons, thumping 6-charge salvos into the foam. Explosions erupted ahead, one shearing U-384's casing. Fisher yelled, "Tauchen!" as the boat dove frantically, klaxons piercing the chaos. Hesperus joined, depth charges from her K-guns bracketing the dive, crumpling the pressure hull in a cascade of rivets and screams. Water roared in, shorting panels, the Enigma sparking its last as U-384 spiraled down, 46 souls vanishing into the deep. Walker watched the debris field, oil, cork, a sodden code wheel, circle in the eddies. One less wolf. He logged as SC-122 pressed on, losing just 3 stragglers to the pack's remnants. The battle raged for days, but Ultra's edge, built on cribs from slovenly keystrokes, blunted Burmark, sinking 5 U-boats while saving the convoy's core. At Bletchley, Clark archived the break, the crib vault burgeoning with Atlantic variants, operator frailties from Biscay to the Arctic. Welchman confided to Newman over tea, "That single lazy thread from 40 now binds the fleet. Donitz's wolves are starving." As the storm abated, leaving the sea a churned graveyard, the code's unraveling accelerated. Bletchley's quiet triumphs, woven from human oversight, heralded the Atlantic's turning, one more decrypt tipping the scales toward invasion's dawn. May 24th, 1943. The midnight fog clung to the decks of U-556 like a shroud over the Denmark Strait, the frigid waters between Iceland and Greenland heaving with the restless pulse of the Arctic current. You can feel the bite of the spray needling your skin, taste the metallic chill on your lips, and hear the muffled groan of the hull as the Type 70C U-boat ghosted at periscope depth, her diesels silent. Electric motors whispering through the depths. The Wolfpack, now a ragged shadow of its former ferocity under Operation Rugen, hunted convoy ONS-5, a battered formation of 42 ships clawing westward from Liverpool, their holds heavy with Lend-Lease tanks and aviation spirit for the Russian front and the looming Normandy beaches. In the suffocating radio room, where the air stagnated with the sour reek of damp wool, unwashed skin, and the sharp ozone tang of the Enigma's relays, Funker-Gefreiter Lucas Vogel slouched at his station, the compartment's single bulb swaying with the boat's roll. At 23, Lucas was a conscript from the Ruhr, his eyes ringed black from weeks of evasion. Allied hunter-killers now prowled with predatory precision, sinking boats at a rate that chilled even Donitz's iron resolve. The Enigma machine, its wooden case scarred from torpedo-loading mishaps, dominated the narrow desk. Rotors aligned to the naval home waters key, updated via the latest Kurt signal heft short signal book smuggled aboard. Order 6634, ring settings 152812, plugboard snarls like LY, MN, promising the cipher's vaunted invulnerability with its astronomical wheel combinations. Korvettenkapitan Herbert Wohlfarth, U-556's ace commander with a Ritterkreuz at his throat, had surfaced briefly in the murk for this vital ping. The pack's coordination teetered on these reports, summoning U-304, U-707, and survivors from Burmark's wreckage. Lucas's fingers, chilled and fumbling, struck the keys. Contact convoy ons 5, 4 Schiffe escorts, 10, position 61N35W, angreifen mit Pack, Treibstoff 25%. Contact convoy ons 5, 42 ships, escorts 10, position confirmed, attack with Pack, fuel 25%. The rotors stepped with oiled precision, lamps blinking as the message twisted into impenetrable groups, HXPLM VQRTZ. But at the end, the weight of isolation pressed in, the boat's last resupply a distant memory, crew morale frayed by tales of ghost attacks that seemed to anticipate their every move. Protocol, etched in blood during Kriegsmarine indoctrination, forbade the indulgence, no fixed phrases, no salutes that could etch a crib into enemy hands. Yet Lucas, his mind adrift on thoughts of a fiancé's letters from bombed-out Essen, succumbed to habit. "Heil Hitler," he added, the keys yielding like an old friend, a spark of defiance in the void. No time for variance. The hydrophone operator's urgent buzz warned of escorts closing. He tapped the Morse, the signal lancing from the snortmast's antenna into the fog-shrouded night. Frequency shifted to dodge the British jammers, racing toward the BDU's vanishing network. 400 miles south, aboard the sloop HMS Starling, flagship of the 3rd Escort Group, knifing through the swells at the convoy's port quarter. The fog muffled the crash of bow waves against the hull, the air thick with the briny fog and the faint, acrid whiff of depth-charge cordite from a false alarm hours earlier. Commander Frederick John Walker, Frederick to his crew, the Johnny of U-boat lore, stood resolute on the bridge, his duffel coat lashed tight, binoculars sweeping the grey veil. At 48, the wiry tactician had become the Atlantic's scourge, his group, Starling, Wild Goose, Wimbrel, and Wren, a floating fortress honed by Ultra's whispers, their Aztec domes pulsing like the heartbeat of vengeance. In Starling's cipher office, a steel cocoon amid the thrum of Parsons' turbines, Wren telegraphist Beatrice Langford tuned the Marconi receiver, her headset a lifeline amid the compartment's fug of machine oil, stewed tea, and the perpetual damp. At 22, Beatrice had enlisted post-Bath Blitz, her Morse fist now decoding the Kriegsmarine's death knell. The Y stations at RAF Chicksands and the Faroes snared the burst, bearings converging on the Denmark Strait's throat. Beatrice's pad filled, the ciphertext tail matching the spectral pattern. "There it is," she said to her counterpart, leading telegraphist Victor Hale, who cross-checked the log with a grim smile. "The salute again. Bletchley's got their daily bread." The intercept hurtled via one-time pad to Bletchley's nerve center, slotted into the dawn watch as the estate stirred under a pallid sun. Hut 8, now a labyrinth of reinforced concrete amid the original wooden sheds, hummed with the ceaseless churn of machinery, the air laced with the hot wax of ceiling tapes and the yeasty scent of the mansion's kitchens. Gordon Welchman, his frame leaner from the tonnage battle's toll, poured over the flimsy with a skeleton crew. Turing's focus had shifted to probabilistic computing at the NPL, but his bomb legacy endured. Joan Clark, now a linchpin with a quiet authority, affixed the strip to the analyzer board, her team, Jack Good, Peter Hilton and a phalanx of Wrens encircling like surgeons. Over 100 bombs thundered in dispersed sites from Stanmore to Wavendon, their American-supplied relays devouring configurations at 5 Zuazurn per minute, augmented by Flower's Colossus prototypes, cracking the layered naval traffic. That primordial Heil Hitler from U-47's Hans Lauer in 1940, a single yawn's echo, had metastasized into the crib Bible, collated from hundreds of lapses, weather banalities like WN wind reports, tactical shorts, A2 attack signals, and the unvarying salute-haunting operator logs from the Baltic to Brazil, lazy keystrokes. Born of war's grind, over 200 U-boats lost since 41, had gifted Bletchley the statistical edge, turning Enigma from fortress to sieve. "Cue the crib," Clark commanded, aligning the 10-letter plain text against the terminus. The bomb he engaged with a seismic rattle, drums whirling, pins cascading as falsehoods fell. Rotors, 6, Truf, rings, 15 to 2812. Plugboards resolved, L to Y, M to N, the decrypt etching clean, contact convoy ONS 5. 42 ships, escorts 10, position 61N 35W, attack with pack, fuel 25%, Heil Hitler. Wolfarth's call, Hilton plotted, the grid blooming with Rugen's fangs, U-556, U-706, a dozen shadows. Vector the group northwest, isolate the Shepherd, ultra cascaded. Admiralty's western approaches rerouted ONS 5 to 280 degrees, escorts coiling like vipers. Walker's TBS crackled, submarine fix bearing 092, range 12 miles, engage. You sense the hunt ignite, Starling's screws surging, the sloop plunging through fog banks, her Type 271 radar piercing the murk to paint U-556's feather. Wolfarth, periscope twirling, caught the Aztec ping too late. Alarm! Tife 200! As the boat dove, claxons shrieking. Lucas Vogel stowed the Enigma in its safe, pulse racing, the signal's betrayal a shadow in his gut. But Starling's squids hurled 24 projectiles ahead, blooms erupting in the depths. Wild Goose's depth charges bracketed, one holing the saddle tanks. U-556 thrashed, Wolfarth ordering counterfloods, but the pack scattered. Rugen's coordination shattered. Explosions crumpled the hull. Air bursting from vents as she sank stern. First, 40 souls, including Lucas, spiraling into the icy embrace. Walker circled the slick, antenna fragments, a rotor drum, logging the kill as ONS-5 steamed unmolested, its cargo fueling the invasion build-up. Rugen faltered, 5 boats down in days, Dönitz reeling with the Black May looming. Where 41 U-boats would fall in weeks, Ultra's harvest from cribs sown by one man's sloth. At Bletchley, Clark sealed the decrypt, the archive swelling with the thread's legacy. Hans Lauer's unthinking keys in 1940, amplified across the fleet, had cracked Enigma wide. Welchman briefed the war cabinet shadows. A single lazy operator gifted us the war at sea. As convoys flowed unchecked, the Reich's noose loosened, Bletchley's silent codebreakers tipping the scales toward D-Day's thunder, one yawn's ripple cresting into victory's tide.